Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for an important matrix presentation of research and a panel discussion on MENA women's representation in media and beyond. I am Dr. Malik Moazzam Doat, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Professor Claire Crawford and Professor Caroline Heldman from the Critical Theory and Social Justice Department. This event is co-hosted by the Departments of Critical Theory and Social Justice, the Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies Department, and the Representation Project, which is an intersectional gender justice organization. The REP Project is releasing its MENA Women in Media fact sheet today in conjunction with this event, and we're sharing a link to this research in the chat, so go check for that. Please share it widely with your networks. Join us next week, same day, same time, always the same day and the same time for the Matrix and these events, for an interview with author Ray Arata about how men can become great allies in the workplace. Just a quick housekeeping point, we'll have a lively Q&A discussion at the end, but feel free at any time to put your questions in that Q&A section. There's a button at the bottom of your screen. And now I'm going to turn this over to Professor Heldman to start the program.
Thank you, Dr. Moazzam Doat. Before we get started with our incredible panel of experts today, we're going to take about 3 minutes to present some new research on MENA women in media from the Representation Project. And it is my pleasure to introduce our research director at the Representation Project, Rebecca Cooper. She is an Oxy graduate, and she previously worked for the Gina Davis Institute on Gender and Media as a senior project manager. She was the research lead for Agenda for Children in New Orleans. Rebecca is also a celebrated slam poet who runs half marathons and lives in New Orleans, Louisiana, with her dog Olive, her cat Pizza, and her partner Gina. Becca is going to present new original research on MENA women's representation in media that is hot off the presses, as in the team just got done calculating the numbers. So Becca, I'll pass the baton to you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for that. There was a few surprises in that introduction. I appreciate that. So let's get into it. Let's take a look at what we know about women in media. And probably this won't come as a surprise to many of you, especially the experts we have on our panel, but there's just not a lot out there. Especially when looking at representations of MENA women in media. There is some research that's done around MENA characters in media, but not a lot for MENA women. And this is in part because there just aren't that many. So let me show you, this is gonna, as Dr. Heldman mentioned, some new research and also some of what we know already from other orgs. So to start off, we know based on a Nielsen report from 2021 that fewer than 2% of TV characters are MENA girls and women. So this includes streaming, broadcast, and cable TV. So just under 2%. And when we look at MENA girls and women in film, we know from the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative that only 8 of the top 100 films from 2019 included a MENA girl and women character. And I just want to take a second to take in this data story for a second, because we're used to seeing, usually we'll say 8% of characters or 8% of leads were MENA women or whoever we're talking about. In this case, this is just 8 of 100 films that had at least one MENA girl or woman here. So this is a low bar, right? That means that there were 92 films that had no MENA women or girls at all. And when we take a closer look at protagonist data, this is the research that we just wrapped, but this is looking at who is cast in leading roles in the top 100 films from the last decade, so the last 11 years. And this is important because this shows who gets to lead in these films, but also protagonists tell us whose stories are getting told in the most popular films. And so this is, again, the top 100 films from the last 11 years, top 100 being the most grossing US films. And you can see there's not a lot going on in this chart for MENA characters overall. We actually only had 2 leads from the last 11 years that were MENA, and they were both MENA men. The first was in 2012 with Sacha Baron Cohen's film, The Dictator, which we'll get into in a second when we talk about the quality of some of this representation. And then the other lead would be Aladdin, that in the live action film that came out in 2019. You'll notice that there are no MENA women on this chart, which means that, again, just to drive the point home, in the last 11 years in the top 100 films from the last 11 years, there's never been a film featuring a MENA woman or a girl as a protagonist, which is just hard to ignore, pretty stark. And we do know that, you know, this actually is true for both MENA men and women. Of course, we're going to be focusing on representations of MENA women, but we know that when MENA characters show up, they are showing up in highly stereotypical ways. The two characters that we saw on the previous chart are a great example of that. We have a character making a mockery of MENA people, a character that is portrayed as a terrorist, a dictator, and another character who's portrayed as poor and uneducated and a criminal. And not to mention the long history with the film Aladdin and its many iterations with racist lyrics. Those two portrayals just in themselves are ripe with MENA stereotypes and tropes. And unfortunately, since there aren't many MENA women in media, in entertainment media, many MENA characters to look at, it is harder to get a real good sense of data around tropes and stereotypes that pop up. But we know based on data put together from the MENA Arts Advocacy Coalition and also TTIE, that these are some of the most common stereotypes that show up for MENA women. So often they are depicted as quiet and submissive, uneducated, and oppressed is a big one, shown as one of many wives, often superstitious or hyper religious, often shown as anti-Semitic, and at times shown as a controlling parent or culturally backwards. We also see the trope of MENA characters, MENA women rebelling against their culture or religion, or sort of starting off as the oppressed woman and rebelling against that. And scholars have talked a lot about sort of the two main tropes for MENA women in media being a paradox, that their MENA women characters are shown as invisible and silent, but also overexposed and eroticized. So that's kind of, those two tropes are the two that we see the most. I want to also say that this list is non-conclusive and unfortunately always growing with stereotypes that we add as we continue to learn more about what good MENA representation looks like for women. So the first trope that we see, I'm just going to go over two of them with you and show you some examples, is the exotic woman trope. And this oftentimes is also the belly dancer trope, right? So this is a Middle Eastern woman character that's shown as exotic, eroticized. She is promiscuous in the way that she dresses and also often in her attitude. And she is usually depicted as mysterious. And two of the classic examples of this would be from the Arabian Nights film in 1942, and also from Aladdin. I took an image from the 1992 version here. And another thing to point out is that oftentimes these belly dancer tropes are shown as identical, right? There's like very little variation in how these MENA women are showing up, even within one scene. And the second trope I wanted to talk to you about is the oppressed woman trope. So this, again, is a Middle Eastern woman character that's depicted as oppressed by maybe her husband or her culture or her family members or all of the above. But the idea here is that she lacks the agency to make her own decisions freely. And often those tropes overlap. We often see oppressed women who are still, who are invisible in one scene and still shown as oppressed, right? They're not mutually exclusive. And one example that I'm gonna point out today is from Sex and the City 2. I know that many scholars and journalists have talked about this particular scene, but it's a movie that came out in 2010. And there's a scene at the end where Samantha, who's depicted on the left, drops her purse and a bunch of condoms come out, and she's sort of immediately encircled by angry Muslim men yelling at her and shaming her for what she's wearing and for the fact that she is having sex. And it's this really gross trope throughout the entire film of these women being in, I'm going to put in air quotes, Abu Dhabi, because I believe it looks like a Hollywood version of that. But ultimately in the middle slide here, you'll see that the women were brought, the Sex and the City main characters were brought back and have this moment with these MENA women who reveal that they are also interested in fashion, although they can't talk about it. And they have this really kind of gross moment together where they befriend each other over fashion. And then, and at one point, I think Carrie even says, it's almost like the men don't want them to have a voice or hormones. And it's supposed to be a funny moment. And then also at the end of the film, the Sex and the City cast needs a way out past the angry men. And so the MENA women that they've met lend them their burqas. And so just a good example of how these women throughout the entire time they are shown on screen are just absolutely reduced to this trope of the oppressed women. And there are many more tropes and stereotypes to learn about and talk about. And lucky for you, the people that are doing this work are on this panel. And lucky for me, I'm incredibly excited to pass the baton back to the panel and hear from the experts.
Thank you, Rebecca. Now Professor Crawford will introduce our excellent panel of experts today.
Great. Today with us, we have first coming up, Sue Obedi, runs the Hollywood Bureau of the Muslim Public Affairs Council Impact. Since the Hollywood Bureau was launched in 2011, Sue Obedi has blended the love of her faith with her love of film, television, and digital series to change and expand the narrative of Islam and Muslims in the entertainment industry. In 2017, Sue was chosen for Variety's Inclusion and Impact Report as one of the 60 change makers, making the entertainment industry more inclusive. On the front lines of media, Sue is a self-professed couch potato at heart and a huge consumer of content. What attracts Sue to the entertainment industry and the stories being told, Sue always says good stories can change hearts, and change hearts can change minds, and change minds impact our values and can galvanize us into action. Sue also has an MBA in marketing. Thank you, Sue, for being with us today. Next, we have Dr. Nahid Al-Tawantawi as an Egyptian-American associate professor of journalism and women and gender studies and associate dean of the Nido R. Wabin School of Communication at High Point University. Her research focuses on women and gender studies, media representation, social media activism, and critical and cultural studies. Her work has been published in the various books and peer-reviewed journals, including Feminist Media Studies, International Journal of Communication and Critical/Cultural Studies. Dr. Al-Tawantawi has presented her research at various national and international academic conferences and conventions and appeared as a featured speaker at many universities. Thank you, Dr. Al-Tawantawi, for being with us today as well. And last but not least, glad to introduce Lorraine Ali. Lorraine Ali is an American journalist and pundit who is a member of the George Foster Peabody Awards Board of Juries based in Los Angeles, California. She is a television critic at the Los Angeles Times, and she was previously a senior writer and music editor. Her work has appeared in publications such as Rolling Stones, the New York Times, GQ, and Newsweek, where she was a senior writer and music critic from 2000 to 2009. Ali was born in Los Angeles, California. Her father was an immigrant from Baghdad, Iraq, and her mother a native Californian of French-Canadian ancestry. Since the American invasion of Iraq in 2003, Ali has published dozens of stories about her extended Iraqi family, the ensuing refugee crisis, and President Donald Trump's 2017 travel ban. She has also written about the portrayal of Muslims in American media, film, and television. Thank you for also being with us. All right. And
thank you, Professor Crawford. Incredible bios. So let's just jump right in. This is a question for all of the panelists. And Sue, let's start with you, and then move to Lorraine, and then move to Professor Al-Tawantawi. So Sue, let's get a good handle on the problem of MENA women's representation. So Rebecca just presented some data, but talk to me, you've been doing this work for a very long time in Hollywood, trying to make it better, right? How are MENA women typically represented in US entertainment media, maybe news media? What are some of the most egregious tropes and stereotypes, and why are they so persistent?
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you for the invitation. I'm so honored to be here and to be with my friends here, Lorraine and Professor Al-Tawantawi. And Malik, I miss you. We need to get together. I mean, the reality is it's been a problem since the inception of the industry. This is not a, couple of decades that we're dealing with this. This is since the inception of the industry. MENA women, Manasa women, Muslim women. I mean, I noticed the laundry list of stereotypes that Rebecca said. Those are all consistent with the issues we have with the Muslim women representation, that we're chattel, we're submissive, that, we're one of four wives. And the reality is, the reality of how we really are is completely opposite. I mean, we are the original badasses. We're the original Eves. We're the original Virgin Marys and the original, Sarahs and Hagar and Hagar and all the other women that came up through history. And honestly, if you really want to know the truth, why women it's not a MENA women problem. It's a women's problem. And literally, and I'm just going to make a blanket statement. People can agree or disagree, but even in Judeo-Christian tradition, when Eve was blamed for Adam's downfall for eating the apple, there you go. There's that trigger to get put women on the hit list of society. And then it just continued, So it really started from the beginning of time. The Hollywood industry made billions on our backs on bad representation. And why is the question? The why is probably because it serves an agenda. It serves an agenda, right? And so that's the why. I personally think I see TV getting better. I know this was about film. I do see TV getting better. There are some examples, especially in animation, where you see Muslim, MENA, Manasa women are the badasses, especially in when you do watch Nickelodeon or Hulu, the animated shows, you have some super characters and portrayals. So film is generally lagging behind for all communities. The why, I think there's an agenda I really do believe that there's an agenda to keep our voices down. I think it serves the political environment as well. And I'm not a conspiracist, but it's like if you portray us that way, it's easier to vilify us and to hate us, But I am actually very hopeful, especially when it comes to TV. Film is so far behind.
Well, okay, so we'll start the panel with a little hope, Sue. Maybe we'll hold on to that.
Yeah, can I just add something,
please.
Dr. Caroline? It's so funny because I'm an immigrant to America. I came from the Middle East, and television and film were my shelter from the storm. And the storm was being the other, being different. And so it is ironic that I found comfort in an industry that vilified me. But it really is going to be this industry that gets us out of it. And I think the future is hopeful because of the young and new generation of filmmakers that we are seeing, around in TV and film. And they're really, really holding the industry accountable in so many ways.
Including your organization, right? And your work, Sue. Which
we're just one organization, Dr. Caroline, and we have it's all hands on deck. But thank you for that.
Yes. Professor Elton Towie, talk to us a little bit about, you've done research in this area for a very long time. Tell us about the problem and its persistence.
So my research has mainly focused on the news media representation, but I don't see a huge difference from what Rebecca talked about and what Sue has mentioned. Like some of the main dominant portrayals that I've seen in my studies is still that women from North Africa and the Middle East seem to be portrayed as one monolithic group. There's no diversity in the representation. Generally speaking, they are either portrayed as oppressed, either by men, by religion, by the veil. If they're not oppressed, then they are portrayed with this Orientalist image of the mysterious sexualized object. If it's not this or that, then they are the exception. It has to be the woman who was able to break free from the oppression, from the veil, and she is an exception. She is not the norm. We rarely see women from the region who are relied on as experts in a story. They are used in a story because they are the know-how. They are successful, or they work and they're hard workers, and we are relying on them as experts in this area or that area. We see them in stories that are usually controversial stories that are on terrorism, stories on negative stories related to issues with refugees, like the travel ban, for example. We had a lot of stories that would highlight refugees and women from the region, or stories related to what was happening in Afghanistan. That's when you would see women from the region in the news, but not normal stories where we'll just hear about normal women from the region, a happy story or a story about someone successful. And that's a problem because we've seen how rates of attacks against Muslim women, especially, unfortunately, because of their hijab, they're very easily detectable and identifiable. And when we see these stories very salient in the news, it's very easy to identify these women, and they're the first to get these attacks or to receive these attacks because of such negative stories or negative stereotyping. So that's a big issue or a big problem.
Thank you for that breakdown. And Lorraine, you work as a journalist and you write about entertainment media, but you also write quite a bit about hard news. So you've got expertise in both of these areas. What are your thoughts on the problem and its persistence?
Well, I think, you know, what we just discussed already, I mean, there's overlap, you know, it's the same kind of problem that we're talking about in the news media as opposed to entertainment. And the idea of, you know, if you just look at the way that Ilhan Omar has been looked at in the media, you know, she was the other. And then the second she starts speaking back, oh, she's dangerous, right? I mean, she's been, you know, if you kind of look at the evolution of how she's been treated, it really fulfills every single one of these things we're talking about. Then you flip it around. Like I think about, and it's funny, Sue, what you said about, you know, growing up here, I never saw like any, you know, MENA women. And here I gravitated towards pop culture, right? I mean, I Dream of Jeannie was like the closest thing in reruns. I'm like, yeah, no, that's not it, right? But it's so interesting now because with television, I do think we're seeing these breakthroughs because it is so fragmented in television now. It's got room for these voices to come up. So you're getting things like We Are Lady Parts. You're getting things like characters like in Never Have I Ever, you know, Miss Marvel's going to come out. So to me, that represents where we're going. That represents, that's the front end of it. Because I think as we have seen the media, when it's structured and when it's operating as it has traditionally, there's no room for that. But when it's breaking apart and fragmenting, all of a sudden this stuff is coming up. So that's really exciting to me. Film is terrible. And I think it is a problem overall. I agree that it's with female representation in general. But I will say also that just as someone who, you know, I do appear on television talking as an expert on things. And I've shown up to studios where I was going to, you know, comment on a story I've written about Iraq or my family, and they were really disappointed when they saw me because they were like, wait a minute. You don't look like, I know they wanted me to show up like in a hijab. I know they wanted me to look more Muslim or Arab or Iraqi. And it was just, it's so funny. It's either so disappointing or surprising. And I'm like, well, what am I supposed to look like? So therefore, even walking in the door, I busted a stereotype. You know, it's like, well, what were you expecting? So, I mean, that's what was really interesting to me as well.
Just to add, if I may, Dr. Caroline, one of the worst compliments that I've ever received in my life was, I really wish all Muslim women could be like you. And to Dr. Iltintawi's point and to Lorraine's point is that we're not the exception. We are the rules. Like we are the rules. Lorraine from her family from Iraq, like we're the cradle of civilization. We made all of you, with all due respect to all of you. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm so sorry. Like, we discovered surgical equipment. We discovered talk therapy. We discovered so much that is just kind of put on the back burner. And it's not even about what we discovered. It's like, don't take away, you know, who we are just because you want to put us in a box, you know. But really, honestly, We Are Lady Parts and so many other television shows are breaking the mold and powering through. And I just wanted to reiterate what Lorraine said and what Dr. Iltintawi said. And compliments can be so backhanded that sometimes people just don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hey, how about we build on this? So a question for you, Lorraine. As a journalist, you have a front row seat to the profound implications of that framing and those representations. So I was wondering if you could tell us about how you understand the relationship between those media representations of MENA women and MENA people in general in the US, and the lived consequences for them in the US and for the way it plays out in foreign policy?
Well, I think starting in the US, we touched on this a little bit. I mean, it is, Muslim women, if they are covering, or, if you're South Asian, or if you look, that you look as somebody would identify that doesn't really understand, you stand out, right? So if those images, and they have been negative or other, then you are a target, and it is dangerous. And the numbers show it. I mean, hate crimes show it, harassment, and that's in the States alone. I think overseas is interesting. I mean, from what I have seen, and I'm going to flip this around into, I can't really say in terms of like, foreign policy from country to country, but just in terms of how women see themselves, right? Like I've sat in rooms in different, across the Middle East mostly, but also in India, where women are watching television or we're watching films, most of it pumped through Hollywood. They're not seeing themselves at all on that. So their image of how they measure up is almost like there's a standard. Here's the American standard. Okay, we need to measure up to that. And it's so ass backwards. It drives me crazy because it's Hollywood pumping out this standard in a way that I think I don't know. I think if that's more like a sociological or maybe cultural thing. But I think just in terms of foreign policy, I would say it's more how women aren't covered overseas. Like when you see coverage, I mean, how often do you see, if we're doing any coverage overseas at all anymore in the media, which we hardly have any foreign bureaus, they aren't talking to women. And they aren't, it's men screaming in the street, burning a flag or whatever it is, and talking about the poor women who are like huddling behind the wall, so like, I don't know, it's complicated. But I do think that big piece of Hollywood pumping out this idea of what beauty is, of what, a real woman is, of what feminism, of what is feminist and what is, being lady, all of those things are so twisted, and where we as American women have struggled with that are still, I mean, I think it's even worse when you go overseas, because those women aren't seeing themselves at all.
And if I can just jump into it, because I vacation a lot in the Middle East, and I totally agree with Lorraine. But there are women who are pounding the pavement for change, right? They're like profiles and documentaries about women who are race car drivers, like in Palestine. Like, like that, like, have you heard of that? Like that would surprise anyone. But there are so many women who are powerful and leading the way in the Middle East who are not getting the coverage, to Lorraine's point. And so I really do believe, like as a consultant to the industry, when I get a script and I'm like, this isn't authentic. Well, why isn't it authentic? Because this isn't the norm. They really push back. They mean just in general, push back. Like it's accurate. Yes, it does happen, but it's not the norm. And so, but they really want to fall back on the comfort. But this is what we know about Muslim women and MENA women. So we want to perpetuate that paradigm. And so when you explain that does happen, but that's just really the minority, it's like you're opening up eyes and minds. And it's like, why don't you know it? You're writing about a community that you don't know about. Like, why don't you know more? And that, of course, goes to the question of like, why aren't the MENA women, the MENA community, why isn't the MENA community, the Muslim community in the writers' rooms? And I'm talking specifically about television. Again, film is a lost cause for so many communities, unless you're white, straight, and male, so that's why we really focus on TV at MPAC. I mean, I'm sorry, one more thing. I literally sat, Lorraine, watching a TV show about women in Jordan when there wasn't one woman on the panel, and no one blinked. To like, I was sitting with my cousins, like, isn't this weird? Like, isn't this weird? You're talking about women issues and there's not one woman on the panel. Anyway.
Yes, no, thank you both, Lorraine and Sue, for building on that. This question is for Dr. Eltawi. I think as you were talking about your particular media focus in MENA Women is in news, what can you tell us about what you've learned over the years in researching this topic, and what are the most compelling findings from your research that you wish for everyone to know?
So I've already spoken about some of the dominant stereotypes, so I'm not going to go over those, but other things that are important to talk about, and I think some of the panelists already touched upon this a little bit about, for example, what are some of the reasons that we see these portrayals? From my research, I found that usually the portrayals are more salient when we have certain political issues happening. So with 9/11, with whatever was happening politically, Bush trying to invade Afghanistan, Iraq, a lot of the negative portrayals were salient then. When Trump was trying to do the Muslim ban, again, there was actually, to be fair, there was a lot of positive portrayals, but there was also a lot of negative portrayals as well. So it's usually tied to what's happening politically as well. The other thing is it's back to Islamophobia. It's just a phobia, just like other phobias. It's a fear and hatred and hostility toward Islam, towards Muslims, and it's disseminated by these negative stereotypes that result in bias and discrimination towards Muslims. And I think I've also women, because of their dress code, they are the ones that are targeted. The thing probably that I want to talk about quickly is how based on research and based on statistics, I mean, we can no longer really just sit and watch these stereotypes and do nothing about them, because statistics show us that Islam is the fastest growing major religion. And indeed, if the current demographic trends continue, probably by the end of the century, Muslims are expected to exceed the number of Christians. So we really need to try and change the way we portray Muslims if we want to, to be able to treat people fairly the way they should be treated in the media.
And I just going to jump on that right there. That last fact is probably a big reason why we're constantly seeing negative narratives and why we're the Islamophobia, the 9/11, the terrorist narrative that we seem to not be able to get out from under. I grew up when the Arab oil crisis was happening. The narratives then, I was there I was around for the Iranian hostage crisis. The narrative, it's like we are struggling to get out from under these narratives. But I really believe the answer is in television and in the young generation of filmmakers, creatives. I mean, when I say there's no hope for film, I should not be so pessimistic. It's just a slower medium. That's all I'm trying to say. But really, we have to listen to Dr. Eltawi, because the reality is there are people all around the world who do not want to see Islam as the fastest growing or the number one religion in the world. That's true. I mean, that's a fact.
I'm sorry.
No, Lorraine, please.
I just want to say, and we've talked a little bit about this, but the idea of, representation also, I mean, there aren't a lot of me in newsrooms,
right?
There aren't a lot of us, there's more coming up in television, not a lot in film. So that is so critical, because a lot of those stories that, I wrote about with the Muslim ban or what, those wouldn't have happened unless I was there. So we just need that. And it sounds so basic, but whoever is out there listening to that, we need that. We need you.
Yeah, no, it's not basic. It's real and it's true. And so, anyway, I just wanted to add to what Dr. Eltawi said about the fastest growing religion. I think that's something that terrifies many people.
Well, and Sue, and I want to bring it back to your work and your model of change, right? Because you run the Muslim Public Affairs Council, the Hollywood Bureau, right? Mm-hmm. So in your bio, we heard that you talked about shifting hearts and minds, but what is your model for fixing this situation, given that representations have such a profound impact on the dehumanization of people and translates into policy and everyday experiences?
Yeah, I mean, the model, the theory of change for MPAC has always been engagement. And the engagement is, getting in there and being available to industry decision makers, creating programs within the organization to identify writers that we can introduce to the decision makers, identify Muslims who can be in the business side of the business, right? Because we're always talking about the creative side, but there's the business side. We need people we need executives in the greenlighting positions. We need people in development and finance. And to Lorraine's point, we need more of Lorraine's in the journalism, in the news media. We need to get to a point where having a Muslim character is not a big deal anywhere, right? Because it is kind of a big deal when you see someone. And then also too, I don't know if we're ever going to arrive, right? It's a journey, not a destination. I really think we're going to get better. We're going to see, things change rather. And I think in the next 5 years, I'm personally very hopeful. But are we ever going to arrive? I mean, look at the Black community in Hollywood. We're all struggling. Look at, the Latinx community, the Asian community. We're all struggling to improve narratives. And so it's this constant, movement to moving the needle. And I think the answer is, like, our theory of change is we're stronger together. So working together with other communities who've been doing this longer than we have. So we're just one organization, Dr. Caroline. We're not the end all be all. I mean, we're also looking to the filmmakers who are out there pounding the pavement, and this is their livelihood, and they're doing so much, and they need open doors. They need yeses. They need to get their content created, but it's like, it's how, when the rubber meets the road, there's no one answer. So when you ask about our theory of change, it's consulting, connecting our industry, our talent to the industry decision makers, and it's also contributing our thought leadership through panels and op-eds and screenwriting labs. So that's really.
Can you name a win or something? So you're talking about hope. Have you had wins?
I mean, it's not impact's wins. I mean, it's the Riz Ahmed, it's the Mahershala Ali's, it's the Ramis. We need women, by the way. We need, Amber Ferris. We need the Lena Khans. We need the Sahar Jahanis to be, out there, And so the win for impact, if we can get a Muslim writer hired, which we do, but we really can't talk a lot about it, or hired in an accounting department, or hired as a PA, that's a win. Those are wins. If we can get a scene that has adhan, which is the call to prayer, happening during an execution, and we can get that scene removed, that's a win. So the wins can be little, but they can add up,
Yes. Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question for Lorraine, just building on that, really thinking about what is progress and how do we see it? Where have we seen progress for men and women in terms of media representations, moving into positions of power, cultural respect in the US, et cetera? And what backlash have we seen against prominent men and women in positions of power?
Well, even though I brought up Ilhan Omar in terms of, the Führer, I mean, that's huge progress. Rashida Tlaib, the massive progress, right? That was like so exciting. And to me, that was a massive breakthrough, well, not just to me, to our community, to women, all of that. And then I think, like I said, we've said it, but in terms of scripted television and what I've seen, that's really exciting. You haven't seen We Are Lady Parts. It's so good. And it is about a Muslim, all-female punk rock band. It's British. It's got every type of possible character in it. And it tackles every possible trope, and it's hysterical. And it's so wonderfully kind of lampoons everything that you think they're going to go down a road. You're like, oh no, don't do that. And you're like, oh my God, you went there. And then you like blew it up. And it's so great. So that to me is victory. It's a victory, I think. Well, let me talk about it in my own sense. Like whenever I noticed, okay, because I am a columnist and I am a critic and I write with my opinion, I noticed once, Trump came into office, the feedback that I was getting and the responses I was getting were getting more and more race-based, more and more bigoted, and more threatening and violent and scary. And I thought, okay, we're rolling backwards here. Here we are, we're rolling backwards. And I felt like, or is it just they're more emboldened? But now I find that like, there's also more kickback on the other side. So I feel like that is kind of progress. In a way, it almost took the sheer baldness of that hatred and it being, enacted, politically on a state-sponsored level for there to be some kind of, push the other way. And I know that sounds kind of like, a bad thing has to happen for a good thing, but I sort of saw a slip back and then some progress. I don't know. I mean, I want to see more progress, and recently I just see a lot of infighting in the Muslim community and it bums me out. And I wish that wasn't the case, but maybe that's part of the growing pains. So yeah, but the fact that we're sitting here talking about this and I'm sitting here with all you incredible women, that's some damn progress right there.
That's right. Okay, well,
And,
thank
and
you.
Lorraine, sorry, one more question to Lorraine. The Amna Nawazes and the Sabrina Siddiquis of CNN, they're coming up,
You're right.
the Hannah Alam, Laila Fadl, all in the news media, I get emails all the time to, from young journalists who want to be connected. And, it's slowly happening even in the news media.
You're right.
I don't want to keep saying I'm hopeful. I just am, and but
Sue, hope is good. No,
it
you're right.
is. No,
And
it
that's
is.
good to
It
point out.
is. It really is. But it's painful too. I mean, it's just painful, it's painful to be as old as I am, to have known what the industry did to us, and to probably not really realize and see the industry in 30, 40 years, because I do think all the work we're all doing, all the work that the filmmakers are doing, and that one day all of this is going to be like, what problem? One day, just,
Hope so.
sometimes when when you light a flame, you're not going to be able to sit by, you don't sit by the fire sometimes,
Okay, so Dr. Altantawi, I want to talk to you about your research. So you've published research to raise awareness about MENA women's underrepresentation and misrepresentation. But I wonder if you could talk to us about the importance of research in addressing this problem. Right, so we've talked about it in other ways. So how has or can research be an effective tool in this struggle for social justice? And then, if you don't mind, are there obstacles to conducting more and better research that you think that we face?
So definitely research can be an effective way to help in this social justice struggle. When you are providing the facts, the evidence of the stereotyping, that's one of the best ways to show that we are having problems, that we are having stereotype problems. And especially if you can also supplement that with voices from these Arab women. And I always like to highlight this irony that the West tends to always claim that these women are voiceless and they don't have a voice and we're helping them, but you're actually not. You are the ones making them voiceless. So by providing or using the women's voice in your research to show that this is not us, you're not really portraying us the right way, I think this is one of the most effective ways to show that we have problems in the way we're doing our research. Now, obstacles, I think, Lorraine, maybe you mentioned this, that maybe some of the obstacles is you're not with regards to, like, some reporters probably will claim that when they are covering stories, they probably don't always have access to women in certain countries. So that's usually why they don't have accurate stories or balanced coverage, or that's usually why the stories don't come out the way they're supposed to come out. So that can impact the stories, and hence it will impact your research. But in terms of doing the research, hopefully, I mean, there's a tremendous literature on this. So, I mean, there's a lot of literature that's been done, not just on the portrayal of Arab women, but in general on minorities and how they're portrayed. So
Just a quick follow-up. Is there difficulty getting funding to do large-scale research to around these issues?
well, funding in general is not easy to get.
Of course.
I mean, if I guess if I personally haven't tried to get it, to be fair, but I think if there's always a grant somewhere. I think if you try that, there'll probably be a grant for it somewhere. But I haven't tried to get a grant to do this. And I'm lucky that I can do it without the grant. So, yeah.
Well, your research is incredible. We've used it for years, and so it's an honor to be speaking with you. I'm going to ask the last question because we're pretty rapidly running out of time with this lively discussion, and we also have a question in the Q&A. It's a really basic one. What are you watching, reading, consuming that you would recommend that features MENA women? I know, Lorraine, that you're watching We Are Lady Parts. You also mentioned Never Have I Ever. But we'll start with you, Sue. What are you watching? What would you recommend? And then we'll go to Lorraine. And
I am desperately awaiting season 2 of We Are Lady Parts.
Yes.
Desperate, yeah. So it's on Peacock. If you want to know where it's at, it's on Peacock. And like Lorraine said, the things they talk about, there's intersectional identities of Muslims. And what I love about the show in general, that they all love Islam and being Muslim, you know. And so the work of MPAC is really we're not a religious organization. We're working to protect the image of Islam. And this show literally protects the image of Islam. It's like season 2, I can't wait. Peacock. I don't work. I have no kickbacks. I'm just
You're
saying.
not making any cash off of that
Oh, and
recommendation.
NBC's Transplant. It's not the perfect show, but I think it's a good show. Again, no kickbacks. We didn't consult on the show, but you know, it's NBC, national network, you know, and it has a Muslim character that's portrayed by a Muslim actor. And you know, the casting is also, you know, there'll always be conversations about correct casting and authentic casting, but a step forward.
Yeah. Yes.
FBI, CBS is FBI. I know it's actually, you know, law enforcement and the good Muslim, bad Muslim is an issue. But here you go. You got Zico Zaki playing a Muslim character, and he's Muslim too. He's Egyptian. So yeah, so a few things on TV. Yeah, that I'm
Thank
watching.
you, Sue. How about you, Lorraine? What are you recommending?
Okay, so we already talked about We Are Lady Parts. It's a 2017 documentary. It's called The Judge, and it follows a Palestinian female Sharia law family judge around, and this won a Peabody Award, and it is so fantastic, and it is made by a Anglo-American filmmaker, but it's featuring, clearly it's following a Muslim woman, and she is deciding law through a female Muslim Arab viewpoint, and it's fantastic. I thought it was like such a great example of seeing these women we never see. So I love that. I'm waiting for it's going to be called Miss Marvel, Sue, right? On yeah, okay, so that's our,
I think so.
yeah, our female Marvel superhero coming to Disney Plus. So waiting for that, and trying to think of what else. Yeah, it's a slim list, my friends.
Well, it's good though to have this list for folks who want to make sure that this content gets eyeballs. How about you, Professor Elton Towie? What are you recommending, reading, watching?
Well, actually I'm watching now, but I finished also We Are Lady Parts, and I loved it. And I was actually getting ready to work with one of my colleagues on the research paper on it because we both loved it. She's into punk rock and I'm into anything with Muslim representation. So we were gonna collaborate on it because it's just awesome. I'm also waiting on the next season for Rami. That's one of my favorites, although it's really low on the representation of women, but I feel like it's one of my favorite shows. That's it for now, I guess.
Okay, so we have our short list here. Professor Malik, you're going to, there's a question.
So there's a comment, I think is the way to put it. But maybe we'll want to respond to the comment. It's by Amber Fares. Hopefully I pronounced your name correctly. Here's what it says. There are many fierce female filmmakers in the Middle East, I like the consonants, who are doing amazing work. Shows like Rawan School for Girls and the more Perfect Strangers are coming from the region. So Amber would like to say, I don't think we can ignore that there's a lot of media being made in the Middle East that's more progressive in this regard than in the US. And I wondered if any of you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, I just want to say I agree with Amber, and also want to throw in a show on Netflix called Finding Ola, Ola. Did you see that, Dr. Tintel? Yeah, that. So I just want to agree with that and throw in another show on Netflix. So it's a dramedy. It's a dramedy. Really good show.
Okay, so let's wrap it up with a very quick speed round. You have a magic wand. What is the one thing you do to change, to fix this problem? Sue, we will start with you.
Everything is female driven.
Great, thank you. Lorraine.
Oh, more of us in important places.
Thank you. Professor Elton Tawi.
I would call on the audience to use their social media powers to be active. When you see a problem, just call it out. There's no shortage of social media, embarrassment for big names, in newspapers or news outlets when something like this happens. Shame people when you see a stereotype. Just call them out, and chances are you're not going to be the only one doing it.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. This was an incredibly informative and enlightening panel. Thank you all also for the work that you're doing, right? You're in the trenches, you're using research, you're using pressure, you're using the power of the pen and storytelling to both increase and improve the representations of women in media. So thank you all. Just a fantastic panel.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Good to be with everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.